Good evening and welcome to the regular meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation for September 13, 2023. I am Samantha Priestinson, the president of the BET. I use she, her pronouns. At this time, I will ask the clerk to call the roll so we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Board Member Fry. Abene. Jenkins. Koski. Present. Vice President Brand.
Present.
President Priestinson.
Present.
There are 6 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum, and we will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which has been posted for public access to the city's Legislative Information Management System, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. I would like to start with our land acknowledgement that we are standing on Anishinaabe land, and to acknowledge that these land acknowledgements are only as good as we make them actionable. And I'm happy to name that Roof Depot is being returned, and at the state level, a national park is now in the planning phase of being returned as well. And last night, 200 people showed up to co-create a plan on how to care for our unhoused and provide land and a safe space where they can exist and have access to housing first and rapid rehousing options. Board members, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? We have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted. We move to the acceptance of minutes. May I please have a motion to accept the minutes? Is there a second?
Second.
We have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the minutes are accepted as presented. Next, we move to item 4 on the agenda, which is the scheduled public hearing to receive public comments on the property tax levies proposed in the mayor's 2024 recommended budget. And I will now open the public hearing. The clerk informs me that we have 7 people who have signed up to speak today. Each of you will be allowed a maximum of 2 minutes to offer your comments. And I would also like to acknowledge that we received 3 comments that came in via email from resident Kamar Yokanan, Lisa Boyd, and Ann Winkler Maury. I won't read them, but I want to acknowledge that they did submit comments. Our first speaker is Maddie Henderson from the 5th Ward. Welcome and thank you for being here today. You have 2 minutes.
Good evening. To the council, thank you for having us. And I would like to extend my sincere thanks for the $5 million that was awarded to public housing. But forgive me, I must say, it's not enough. So we still have those problems and more. So if we could somewhere down the line see fit to add a little more, we would highly appreciate it. And again, my heartfelt thanks for the $5 million.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we have Shirley Brown from the 3rd Ward. Welcome, Ms. Brown. Thank you for being here today.
Good afternoon. My name is Shirley Brown, as she said, and I'm here to speak in favor of reinstating the tax levy for public housing. It's gratifying to see support from BET leadership, Mayor Fry, and the City Council for finally taking this important step. I also want to thank the Minneapolis Housing Advisory Committee members who voted unanimously in support of reinstating the MPHA tax levy. Sorry. I live at one of the smaller public housing buildings in northeast Minneapolis. It's a beautiful area in walking distance to 4 different parks, and we love our building and our community. But in the recent year or so, we've had an increase in car break-ins, stolen vehicles out of our parking lot, catalytic converters, stolen cars being left in our parking lot. And so we're not feeling safe. Most of us are older, some have disabilities, and with chronic health conditions. So so we would really, this money that's coming to us is really going to hopefully help get better lighting in our parking lot. so we can feel safe. Most of us are older and have chronic health conditions, and so replacing outdated our building ventilation systems would go a long way towards helping residents improve their health and well-being. All we ask, as you're thinking about this and voting on it, is that you look at us and see us. And please remember us as you're making these decisions about the maximum levy amount for 2024 and the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Paul Arlen from the 4th Ward. Welcome, Paul. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. I live in Hamilton Manor and have so lived for going on 9 years. Recently, well, first of all, I would like to thank everyone who was instrumental in bringing the tax levy this far. The City Council, for its unanimous support, the leadership of the Board of Estimate of Taxation, and Mayor Frey for the $5 million allotment. You know, it's very much appreciated. Recently in Hamilton Manor, we had our plumbing completely renovated, which is excellent. However, we still have ongoing problems. The elevators, the 3 elevators of the building are all frequently break down. People get stuck in the elevators. Sometimes people using the service elevator to either move in or out of the building cannot do so if something like that happens. So we need more funding, as do, of course, many of the other 42 sites in Minneapolis. So I would like to extend the hope that you would continue to consider creating the full levy of $12 million. I think that's all I have to say, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Paul. Next, we have Ronald Jenkins from the 3rd Ward. Thank you for being here with us today, Ronald.
You're welcome. Honorable Mayor, President of the City Council, and City Council members, good evening. I'm here today. My name is Ronald Jenkins, and I am a member and advocate of Minneapolis High Rise Council, as well as a member advocate of the Resident Advisory Board, governed by MHRC and MPHA. I am here today to speak to each council member on behalf of the diverse residents population that live in Minneapolis public housing, as well as to encourage a yes vote for the mill levy tax. The reason why I believe and think it is necessary to vote yes are as follows. Minneapolis housing stock includes public housing as a city asset. Safety and maintenance of Minneapolis housing is important to the success, health, happiness of the residents who live in public housing, as well as to the city of Minneapolis. The city, as well as MHRC and MPHA, continue to be promoters of the long-term retention of housing, including public housing. Renters, as well as population of people that live in public housing, include seniors, LGBTQ+, single adults, veterans, ex-offenders, chronically ill, fixed-income seniors, victims of human trafficking, non-traditional families, unaccompanied youth and young adults, families with children, and other human beings displaced due to domestic violence. Stable and safe housing is needed as the city continues to grow and strengthen. MPHA grant from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has not been enough to sustain and address the much-needed repairs. Thank you.
You can finish your statement.
Okay.
Yes.
Has not been enough to sustain and address the repairs and improvements in public housing, such as windows replacements and exterior facade repairs, plumbing replacement, structure repairs, maintenance electrical switches, gear and generator replacement, window replacement, roof replacement, elevator modernization, property enhancement, and apartment floor placement. Climate change is having a significant impact on public housing residents, and it must be considered in the overall human cost to residents who have currently this year experienced the increasing temperature and heat as well as drought. And finally, there must be a continuation of the quality of life, equity, action, and promotion of the health, lifestyle, and well-being of the residents who live in public housing. In short, residents need your support in passing the meal levy tax. So please vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Tamika Muhammad from the 6th Ward. Is it Tamik?
Tamir.
Tamir.
Tamir. Tamir.
Thank you, Tamir. Thank you for being with us
Thank
today.
you, guys. First of all, my name is Tamir Mahmoud. I live 1515 Park Avenue South. I'm the president of that building, resident council officer. I'm also vice president for Minneapolis High-Rise Representative Council. I'm also MPHA board member. And the reason that I'm here was to approve the levy because seniors that I live, they need a lot of fixed problems such as air quality in the building, maintenance, and security. If I take security, it's very important because they have seen the parking lots, no lights, most of them. It's dark. Trash shoot house is not good, because the building's old. Seniors will live, they are disabled people who has wheelchair and everything. So I appreciate approving some of that tax levy, and I'm asking you to finish the rest of the money, please, because we need them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have John Strum from the 7th Ward.
Good
Thank you for being
afternoon.
here.
Thank you. My name is John Stummy. Full disclosure, I work for the Public Housing High-Rise Tenant Organization, and as part of my work, I've been proud to support resident leaders in calling for the restoration of the public housing tax levy. And I'm also a Minneapolis homeowner, and I'm here to tell you that I am happy to pay a little extra in my property taxes to support housing for those with the greatest need. Every day in this city, we see what should be shocking reminders of the housing crisis in this city and the historical and present-day disregard for the well-being of folks who are disproportionately, by far, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. You have the opportunity to help right these wrongs by supporting the preservation of existing housing and the expansion of new housing. I applaud and admire city leaders who are passionate about this work. We all should be. I personally urge you to restore the tax levy at the full amount allowed. Why not do the most we can to address the housing crisis in our city? Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker we have is Mary McGovern. I know.
Good afternoon. I'm Barb Harris. I also work for the tenant organization. I'm reading Mary McGovern's statement. She wasn't able to join us on time.
Thank you.
So she would say if she were here, good evening. I'm Mary McGovern, president of the Minneapolis High-Rise Representative Council. We represent over 5,000 residents living in the city's 42 public housing high-rises. Over 70% of us are elderly and disabled. Our buildings are solid, but they are aging and are in need of many repairs and improvements. These include replacement of plumbing, electrical systems, elevators, and ventilation systems, the need for air conditioning in all high-rises, and the modernization of our apartments. The High-Rise Tenant Organization has been fighting for years for the city to restore a public housing tax levy, which we view as a stable and ongoing funding source to address MPHA capital and other needs. We appreciate the support of the mayor, the city council, and the leadership of the Board of Estimate and Taxation towards reinstating the tax levy for public housing. The $5 million is a great start, but it's not enough because the needs are so great. We will be looking to you to increase the amount in the future as the needs will only continue to grow. Resident leaders will continue to advocate for funding support from the city and from all levels of government until public housing residents are treated with the level of respect and concern that all people deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we do actually have one more speaker, Jeremy Vinter from the 9th Ward. Welcome and thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Hello. Hi. My name is Jeremy Winter. I am from the 9th Ward. I strongly believe in public housing as a solution to the housing crisis. In its current state, our country's public housing system is drastically underfunded, which is a terrible shame considering the extreme housing crisis we are currently undergoing. I don't think this is going to get any better, and unless we start making funding changes now, it will continue to get worse. I see people around me in my social circles trying to come up with all of these ideas, building tiny homes, community land trusts, things along that nature, but we've had a tool in our pockets for so long. I'm here today because I think that this is the old solution is also our future solution, and I strongly urge you to vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? All right, well, we'd like to thank you all for sharing your voices with us and appreciate you taking the time to be here and those that wrote in their comments. So seeing that there's no additional people, I will close the public hearing. At our next meeting on September 20th, the board will take action to fix the maximum certified tax levies for property taxes payable in 2024. That meeting will be held at the regular time of 4 p.m. on the 20th, just so that everybody is aware of that. And we will move on to our new business. Item 5 on the agenda is a bond transmittal memo regarding bond request to the Board of Estimate Taxation. This is a receive and file item. Are there any questions or would anyone like to discuss? All right. Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to receive and file that item. Items 6 and 7 are resolutions asking the board to concur with the reallocation of excess bond proceeds. I will welcome Ellen Hoppy, who is our Director of Banking, Investments, and Debt, to give us a presentation on these items. Good evening, and thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, President Priest-Stinson and members of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. I'm Alan Hoppy, Director of Banking, Investments, and Debt. And give me a second to open up a file here. There are items 5, 6, and 7 on the agenda. I tried to kind of consolidate all this. Clerk's office has done a lot of work with the various bond resolutions, so it was great to work with their source material. So we have 2 resolutions that we have before you, looking for your approval. In the column I have over here with my mouse, I'm kind of waving, it says passed. These are status of bond proceeds where we're looking for a resolution. One for $73,000, one for $300,000. In this particular case, we had sold the bonds and we got the proceeds and they were used by a project. The project didn't necessarily need all of the funding, and so we're looking to reallocate to the number that's on the right side here. It says new destination. We also have another column here, and the city approves various appropriations and bonding for capital projects, but we haven't bonded for some of that stuff yet. So what you have here in this column that says future, that's referring to future bond sale, are the ones that you have worked with here for receive and file. And the various dollar amounts in thousands of dollars are listed here. So it's 427,000, just going straight down the list, 500,000 and 800,000 further down. The individual, I'm kind of working backwards here, but the whole idea of this matrix was try to bring together all the things that were happening with business items 5, 6, and 7. So the projects are listed here. And then to the left of that, the resolution for reference. The first tier that we have here is a reallocation, as is tiers, if I can get that to work. The third and fourth tier there, those are reallocations where it's not a new bond, a new item per se. It has been somewhere in city authorizations in the past. The other item, the second tier here, is a new authorization, and that's for 500,000. Again, these things that are future bonding, good chance they'll show up in next year's bond issue when we sell that. So this is what we have before us, and before there is a vote on this, I'd like to mention I also have, when I'm done here, a summary of yesterday's bond sale, if the members of the board would like that. That's the presentation I have.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, does anyone have any questions or comments regarding the presentation of the resolutions? Vice President Brandt.
Who are here for the first time, just want to welcome you to the start of volleyball practice, or basketball practice upstairs in the county jail. That's why you're hearing the noise.
Do I have a motion to approve the first resolution? Is there a second? We have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion? Vice President Brandt.
I plan to vote no on this particular reallocation. It's no reflection on Mr. Hoppy or his work. Reflects a long history with the 18th bike gap, which was first proposed by Public Works in 2018 for 2022 implementation. And it was delayed in 2022 to 2023, I believe, implementation. And in this year's capital process, it was delayed until 2028. So in other words, we're moving backwards faster than we're moving forwards on this project. The original proposed cost was $605,000, and I think the latest figure I saw is up in the $865,000 area. This takes money away from a project that the Park Board just recently approved money to study a river crossing near this site and look at the feasibility. And it would be a terrible shame if that went forward and the trail ended several blocks short of the bridge because Public Works hasn't moved forward on this. Now, I will acknowledge that this involves trying to secure an easement on railroad property, and CLIC has supported this project consistently over the last probably now 5 years, including this year. And it's harder to work with railroads, as many of us in this room know, but it's not impossible. CLIC this year urged the Public Works Director to get personally involved, given her background as a state transportation commissioner. And I think it's a consensus of those who have supported this project on CLIC that Public Works just hasn't taken it seriously enough and put the necessary firepower to bear on these discussions with the railroad. And the Park Board has shown in connecting the 26th Avenue overlook with Ole Olson Park near the Riverview site, that it is possible to talk to the railroad and negotiate over an easement, even though it's not necessarily concluded yet. So for those reasons, I'll be voting no on this particular reallocation.
Thank you, Vice President Brandt. And are you calling out item 6-2A in the transmittal, just so we're all clear about exactly which one?
Well, I think the reallocation isn't handled in total in item 6. That's the one that reallocates the $300,000. I think the other reallocations are covered by other agenda items, if I'm correct, Mr. Hoppy?
That's correct.
So are you asking to pull this out and vote separately specifically on this item?
Well, it
What is
appears as an individual item, so number 6 would take care of it, and I think number 7 would take care of the remaining 3 items. Mr. Hoppy, am I correct?
President Priest and Vice President Brandt, that's correct. Again, there's lots of activity going on with this, but I lined it up here so that your BET items 5 and 7 kind of together. One was for the receive and file, and the other was for the 73,000. So I believe was business item number 7 refers to the 73,000 particular authorization or resolution.
So President Priest Stinson, I take that to mean that we could vote separately on 6 and not affect the others.
Yep, that's what I was clarifying. But before we get to that part, and you'll need to make that motion, there is, looks like Commissioner Benny would also like to speak to that item.
Well, thank you, President Priest Stinson. I guess I have a question. So, you know, my experience as a member of a governing body is fairly limited, but at the Park Board, which is the board that I sit on primarily, we would have for this type of decision, we would have some indication from the staff that work in Public Works or something like that, why something's not going forward. And so the monies that were set aside for it or picked up for it are being redirected. So do you by any chance have any information on why this is occurring? And is it because the project is just delayed?
President Priest Stinson, Board Member Ebony, I don't have specifics. You're correct. It usually is at the individual department level that works on the individual project. So I'm typically bringing the bond reallocations and tying it back to the bond issue as far as that body of knowledge goes. In generalization, there are surplus funds, which are, for IRS reasons, we want to use someplace in a project, otherwise move it over to debt service. And so we lined up, or staff in these individual departments have lined up alternate places where the bond proceeds could be used.
Okay, so I guess I'm inclined, you know, the Park Board was invoked, and I sure appreciate that, Member Brandt, but I think I'm inclined to say that I think the staff that works on these projects has a good indication of how to be more nimble with the funds, and right now, what can be done with them. That would be my understanding. The only concern I have is that it's going from something very specific to just a generic program. So that lacks some transparency for the citizens. Money that was allocated in a very transparent way at a specific dollar amount to a specific project is now going to a program area. But those are my questions. Thank you.
Vice President Brandt? You good? Okay. Is there any further discussion? Mayor Fry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not fully briefed on every single last detail of this project. However, I do know that Public Works has been heavily involved, both with the project as well as the advocacy to the railroad itself. I won't share details here, but there is some progress being made. The lack of a final resolution is not a lack of seriousness or effort. It's simply the fact that the railroad has the unilateral authority to just say no, given that it's the property that they themselves own. And so I don't think it's any lack of seriousness or any lack of effort. They have been working on this. We just aren't there yet. And the deprivation of funds doesn't get us closer to the goal, given that the funds are to fund the project that I think we're all for.
Thank you, Mayor Frye. Vice President Brandt.
Mayor Frye, my understanding is that there has been fruitful discussion between the railroad and the park board on the extension between 26th Avenue and the Ole Olson site. What I have not heard through people who are involved in this issue through CLIC, and CLIC approved a comment this year expressing its disappointment in the delay here, that Public Works has made progress on the 18th Trail Gap. I guess I'll wait to be surprised.
Mr. Hoppy, just for clarification before we move to a vote, so it's not that the project isn't moving forward. It's just that in the current state that it's in these negotiations with the railroad, the project literally can't move forward. So I just want to be clear, is it that this project isn't happening at all, or is it just delayed to a further date? So it's not being defunded. Just the money needs to be moved to something else because the project isn't able to move forward. Am I understanding that correctly?
President Priest-Stinson, I apologize. I am not deep into the particular project aspects, just the message that these funds are not lined up or don't have the allocation at this point in time, and therefore the recommendation for the reallocation.
Understood.
Apologize.
Mayor Frye, did you have some? Okay. All right. Any further discussion? Okay, so back to, do I have a motion to approve the first resolution? Is there a second? Okay, we have a proper motion before us. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk, will you please call the roll?
Board Member Frye. Abene.
Aye.
Jenkins. Koski. Vice President Brandt.
Nay.
President Priest-Stinson.
Nay.
There are 4 ayes and 2 nays.
The resolution is approved. Do I have a motion to approve the second resolution?
So moved.
Okay, we have a proper motion before us. Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Will the clerk, seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Board Member Frye. Abene.
Aye.
Jenkins. Koski.
Aye.
Vice President Brandt.
Aye.
President Priest-Stinson.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
The resolution is approved. Next is item 8 on the agenda, which is receiving an overview of the mayor's 2024 recommended budget. And I'll welcome Budget Director Jane DeSenza.
President Priest-Stinson, did you want a summary of yesterday's bond sale?
Yes, actually. My apologies. Short pause.
Members of the Board of Investment Taxation, I come here many times related to bond stuff, and yesterday was the big party, so to speak. We sold around $115 million of various purpose general obligation bonds to fund all these different projects we bring before you. What we call the true interest rate on the bonds was 3.77%. It was well received in the marketplace. We had a total of 10 bidders. That's impressive. It was nice that we got our AAA from both rating agencies that we use, Standard & Poor's and most recently Fitch. So while we do really well in the marketplace as a AAA or more or less a AAA, now we are officially AAA. I have just a couple quick charts for reference. The green line on the top here shows the various tax-exempt municipal curve. The green line is the current environment, and the aqua or blue line below was a year ago. Last year, it cost us about an extra 0.5% to sell bonds, so this chart is kind of saying the same thing, that interest rates have climbed. We all know that, but that's what it looks like on on a curve. And this particular chart, back here in 2009, the red line were 20-year bonds, and the blue line were one-year bonds. So there's a very wide spread. Usually you think of what we call the yield curve upward sloping, so that the further out you're dealing with money, it costs more. And that's typically the case. In the current environment on the far right, you see that the interest rates for 20 years and 1 year are very close, and most of that has to do with the Federal Reserve Bank increasing interest rates on the short end throughout the financial markets. So that's just a general summary again. 3.77%, the bid or the proposal was won by Citigroup, and they also won last year's bond issue. I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, that's just the general summary. Thank you.
Any questions? Great. Thank you, Director Happy. And now we will receive an overview of the Mayor's 2024 recommended budget, and I welcome Budget Director Jane DeSenza. Welcome.
President Priest-Stinson, members of the board, thanks for having me. Jane DeSenza from Finance and Property Services. I'm serving as the interim budget manager. And I'm here today to give you a presentation of the Mayor's 2024 recommended budget. I gave a similar presentation to the City Council on Monday, and this is meant to serve as a transmission of the information and also a kickoff of 2 months of budget presentations to the Council from each department leader. So hoping to just provide you with some context and themes. So our agenda today is to talk a little bit about the budget book. We'll get into some specifics on this budget, the spending and revenue overviews, as well as some accomplishments and challenges that are impacting the framework. And then I always like to do a little bit of a demonstration of the transparency portal, as that's a really important tool for all of your constituents. And then briefly just touch on the markup process. So we are continuing to use a fully online interactive budget book, which is something we switched to in 2022, and we're pretty proud of it. Rather than that static PDF that was 700 pages, we have a version that allows readers to participate in the data. You can click into all the tables and refine the filters to investigate your own questions. So I will, after this slide, take a second and show everyone how to navigate some of those items in the book. Our goal is always to make the budget information as transparent as possible. And so we try to anticipate a lot of the frequently asked questions in the overview section, and that's definitely a great place to start as you're digging in. Thanks are certainly due to all of our partners across the city. The budget book is a tremendous effort for our team, but also for every department who has to do a lot of analysis in order to accomplish each budget book page. So thanks to them for that. Okay, so the budget book section. So just to orient folks to places that they can look for whatever they're interested in, the financial overview is the best place to start. There's a budget in brief, which is a real summary of a summary. There's more fulsome city spending and revenue pages as well that give you an indication as the key trends and how we got to some of our numbers. We've also started listing out the new investments by priority. So if you wanted to see what this budget means for affordable housing, you can go to that page and get a sense of the overall increase to the budget for that topic area. The financial policies are what guide the work largely of the Finance and Property Services Department. We have no changes proposed from what we presented to Council earlier this year. We expect to do a more in-depth review audit of those in our department for the next biennial budget, but these are reviewed annually. The rating agencies take a look at these as well as the state auditor, and they conform to the industry practices, the GFOA and accounting principles. The operating department section is where you'll get the most information, most detail for each department. So you'll get their financial summaries, of course, as well as discussion of their core business lines, their their mission, operating goals, the racial equity analyses that they've written about those items. And that's also where the new budget proposals are described in more detail. Our capital section, which my colleague Adam puts together, is the 6-year capital infrastructure plan. So mostly that touches on the park board, the MBC, Public Works, Property Services, has a great deal of information there. And then the schedules, which are really what the city council votes on in December, has the more technical information on our cash balances by fund, expenses, revenues, transfers between funds, as well as the staffing picture. So I'm going to navigate quickly to the budget book just to give folks in the audience a chance to see how to access this themselves. So on the city's website, minneapolismn.gov/budget, you can see a lot of information about the budget. What I've been referencing is this 2024 Mayor's Recommended Budget, which you can click into. And then down below is a table of contents. So what we just talked about was this financial overview. We've also added a page this year on the grants information, as there's a lot of new revenue sources that are coming the city's way, so those are explained there. Financial policies are below. And then to reflect the government structure, we've split out the council departments, and the mayor's, the more executive branch departments are shown in the middle. We have the capital budget over here. You can see it split out by subject area. So if you want to know about sidewalks in your neighborhood, you can just click right in there and see if your sidewalk is in the capital plan. And then the schedules. So the city, to show folks what the department pages look like, clicking into the city auditor page. So there's basic summary information of the finances in a graphic form as well as in a table. And then it goes into a lot of more detail about their core business lines, their programs with an org chart, mission goals, their services, how they assess the racial equity impacts of those services. That repeats for each program area, and then you get a good deal of detail about any new investments that the mayor's recommending. So there's also a small section at the base which indicates any internal transfers or reclassifications of positions. So thank you for indulging me in that. Okay. So moving on to some accomplishments in this budget. So this is our first supplemental year of this 2-year budget structure that we've moved towards. So the practical benefit of this for departments is that they have another full year to plan. So there were some new proposals that council was able to consider last year, but they're due to start in January of 2024. So they've got a whole year to work with HR to get a job position created and posted and hired and the like. So it's been really helpful just organizationally in that way. It also is worth noting, and I'll say this a few more times, but we are maintaining the same property tax levy amount that was planned for in the biennial budget. Our sales tax revenues have been performing well. We nearly hit pre-pandemic levels in 2022, which was well ahead of our forecasts, and we're continuing to see growth. We have a positive outlook for 2024 there. 2024 is our last year to spend down our ARPA dollars, the federal aid. We got $271 million of ARPA, which has been meant to support a lot of the city's core priorities. The budget team and finance broadly will be working closely with departments over the next several months to understand, what we need to do to get spending moving on any projects that haven't been, and potentially reallocating as needed. But we are committed to spending all of the dollars that we received. And then, as Mr. Hoppy just said, upgraded bond ratings are really exciting for finance and property services. It's a good validation of our financial management policies as a city and our ability to withstand any financial storms. And also, it has an impact on what we can do in our capital program. And so it does redound to the benefit of residents as well. Not unique to Minneapolis, but we do still see a tight labor market. Our vacancy rates have closed quite a bit, but it's still an issue at the city. Vacancy rates mean less personnel spending, of course, but also less people in place to spend other types of dollars. So in addition to slow spending, you might have some overextended staff, and that's something that we're just continuing to work through. We are all continuing to adapt to a new government structure, and we're figuring that out year by year. And of course, this is the year of the MDHR settlement agreement, and we are still awaiting word on the DOJ consent decree, and those have real implications for our budget. So for spending, the mayor's recommending $1.8 billion.
Just a moment.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Priest-Stinson and Interim Director. I'm just curious, you said we're committed to spending all of our ARPA dollars. Do you mean we have a dream of spending all our money, or those dollars are committed to specific projects?
Thank you, President Priest-Stinson, Board Member Jenkins. The City Council has allocated all those dollars. They are all committed and have been vetted and assigned to projects. And so our work is just to make sure those things are moving and that the dollars are actually getting out the door.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that it's not like we have a bank account and we got to figure out what to spend it on. We committed those dollars to very worthy projects. So,
Yes, thank you for the
thank you.
clarification.
Vice President Brandt.
Is there, it's good to know that it's all been allocated, but is there a deadline for the spending to be achieved by?
President Priest-Stinson, Vice President Brandt, we have set an internal deadline of the end of 2024. Finance is in the midst of creating an internal memo so that we can circulate all that information to departments so that they're well aware of all those deadlines.
So that is a internal deadline, not a federally imposed deadline.
President Priest-Stinson, Vice President Brandt, I am not well versed in all of the Treasury rules. I think there is some limitation after 2024 in our ability to reassign dollars. So if we were to have a vacancy at that rate, we would then have to turn the money back.
Thank you.
Mayor Frey.
Briefly, first, a big thank you to Jane and Adam and their whole team. They really stepped up in incredible fashion, especially over this last year, to fill some vacancies that we had, to be able to produce this budget at all. And that's in addition to all of the other really incredible work they're doing. They managed to upgrade the bond rating to AAA status, which is a huge achievement for our city, one that really should be applauded. And so, Jane DeSenza, thank you so much to you and your team. You did just a tremendous job. And as far as the ability to get some of these funds out the door, to the council president's point, she's right. They have been allocated. They have been committed. It really is just a matter of making sure that we're doing the necessary compliance before the money goes out. So if there are certain standards that have to be met before the money goes out the door to these different entities. And if those entities don't meet the standards, then we obviously have the ability to recommit those dollars elsewhere. I think at least to some of the dollars, that is going to be inevitable. That'll happen in every single city around the country, but in ours, I'll tell you, we got the money out the door faster than most any other city that I'm aware of. And that's allowed us to then recycle the money a second time through if it hasn't worked the first, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that. Let me continue.
Okay, so carrying on with the spending, so this is an 8.3% increase from what was adopted in 2023, and that total excludes all of our interfund transfers and the city's independent boards as well, and we are still able to accomplish this with that planned 6.2% levy. So just a reminder on how we got here. So you heard from me and one of my other colleagues, Ben Zimmerman, in May about the current service level budget. So this is really part 2 of that presentation. So in May, we talked to you about how we create the current service level with looking at the personnel budgets, the internal service charges, so things like IT and fleet, the cost of doing business in those areas, as well as the non-personnel base, and that's what comprises the current service level budget. For the mayor's recommended budget, we're looking at the current service level plus any new budget proposals. So that's where we're at right now. The current service level is part of our financial policies, so that's just the starting point for the next year's budget is what we committed to in the prior year. So we pull out any one-time investments, 2023 only items. Because of this two-year structure, we're adding in items that are due to start in 2024. And that's how we get that calculation. So when we talked to you in May, we talked about growing costs of personnel in particular. That's due to a couple factors, one being just the city working through collective bargaining agreements. We've also been doing a lot of job studies as a city, so hourly rates for some positions have increased, and in some cases by quite a lot. And it's also worth noting that for smaller departments, even just a change in your benefit selection from a single insurance to family can have a massive impact on the amount of budget that a department needs. So we're seeing, comparing the 2024 CSL to the 23 CSL, 5.7% growth. And compared to the 2024 dollar amount that we brought before council in December of 2022, there's about a 2.3% increase in that personnel amount. The other part of the current service level that grows are those internal services. And that is really due to inflation, just the cost of doing business. This is also where actuarial reports come into play about, settlement estimates, and then just general maintenance adjustments, like, different office spaces coming online that perhaps cost more to operate. This budget has $48.4 million in new investments across all the funds. If you just look at the general fund, it's about $44.7 million. We asked all departments to provide us some analysis as they were requesting these dollars, so they were instructed to tie each proposal to city priorities. So we looked at the mayor's priorities as well as the council's SREAP goals. They were asked to give an analysis of the racial equity impact of those dollars and then anticipated performance results. So again, for just a primer on all the different priority areas, I would recommend folks using that financial overview priorities page to get a glimpse of that, and then of course the department pages for more detail. You can see on the pie chart that a lot of the expense, 51% of that expense, is going to contractual services, which is a very broad category. It can mean things like hiring consultants. It can also mean, contracts that we might have with nonprofits or construction services. So the next biggest category is personnel on there. And relatedly, wanted to talk a bit, since this is a large portion of our budget, the staffing information. So in the Schedule 5 is where we list out each department's authorized FTEs. So you can see a year-to-year comparison. We've also added some information so you can see the breakdown by department, general fund, and special revenue funds. So there's clearly some growth here. So we're increasing from 4,174 FTEs in the 23 budget to 4,337 FTEs in the 24 recommended budget. So as far as cost, that is an increase from $485 million to $528 million. That doesn't include ARPA positions or other temporary roles. So most of these FTE increases can be explained via the budget proposals, which we've talked about. There's also a mechanism for departments to offset personnel increases by reducing their non-personnel budget, and they do that via a memo to our chief financial officer. So if anybody wants to tune in to all the department briefings this fall over September and October, departments will be prepared to speak to all of these personnel changes at that time, and of course you can read the budget book for more. So moving on to revenue, this is a $1.8 billion revenue budget. $58 million of that is use of fund balance, so dollars that we've accumulated over the years, and the rest of it is new money flowing in. So that would be property taxes, charges for sales and services, and intergovernmental revenues. You can see on this chart 2 years of actual revenues and 2 years of budget revenues. So In 2021 and 2022, you can sort of see the impact of federal aid for CARES and ARPA, and we are weaning ourselves off that so that we're done with ARPA by the end of 2024. Moving on to the property tax levy. So as I said, this is 6.2% levy increase that garners about $28 million of additional revenue in 2024. 6.2% increase does not mean that everybody's property tax statement will increase 6.2%. It depends on the composition of the commercial and residential markets, and our city assessing department works throughout the year to figure out all those calculations. We did see growth in property values for both commercial and residential this year. So for a single-family home, median single-family home owner in Minneapolis, even a 0% increase in the levy would garner about a $29 increase to their property taxes. So we are estimating that the 6.2% increase will mean about $150 to $160 annually for that median value single-family home owner. And I'll show a screenshot of this on the next slide, but I do want to offer a city assessing office does create this levy impact estimator tool, which is really useful. It is an estimate at this stage, but it has a lot of really good information about the calculations and how they impact broadly the city. So just to show folks the screenshot, I think the thing that's beneficial, many things are beneficial, but I particularly like the map that shows the impact by the wards. So you can see in darker green which wards are most impacted by property tax increases. And you can adjust this to play with different levy amounts, with different categories of property types, so commercial, apartments, residential, homestead. And you can filter down to wards as well. So for the median Minneapolis home, they saw a 4.1% increase in value from 2022 into 2023. So that means that their property taxes will be about $1,952 next year. And this is sort of how it breaks down amongst the various city departments and independent boards. So for standalone entities, the police department is often at the top of this list, and then followed by parks and capital and debt service. The new addition here is the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, so that ongoing levy is reflected in this amount now. Okay, this is the levy table, which shows us how we get to that 6.2% total. So the general fund is growing by 5.5%. In the park board, you're seeing the impact of last year's increased funding to add youth services and staffing. And this plan also shows that increase for the negotiated parkway paving that the city worked with NPRB to finalize. The next couple lines are related to bond redemption, permanent improvement. This is part of the debt and investments teamwork. They've done a great job paying down our debts and earning interest, and so we're seeing that benefit in these lines. And this is also where a lot of the capital program funding comes from. The next couple lines are related to pensions and retirements. So in the prior year budget, we reduced the amount we're levying for these, not because our obligations have declined, but just because we've accumulated fund balance and we don't want to over collect. So that's remaining stable here. It's a similar story for the BET and also for MBC. We're using some accumulated fund balance. And of course, the MPHA levy of $5 million ongoing is also reflected on this table. So another revenue source, the sales taxes. We are forecasting net sales tax revenue of $80 million in 2024. So that would be gross revenue of $100 million. You can see certainly an increase over the past couple of years here. This is also including a year of an $8.7 million transfer for the stadium relief that the legislature agreed to in the spring. We keep an eye on revenues and reforecast at least once a year to get, especially as we're recovering from the pandemic. So we try our best to understand how the various sectors are reacting. Local government aid is another major source of funding.
Just a moment. Vice President Brandt?
For me, as a person who's got two chief duties, one is incurring debt and one is setting a maximum levy, a key question that my predecessors as citizen representatives on this board urged us to keep track of, President Priest-Stinson and myself, was the health of the sales taxes, the various sales taxes. I spent a very frustrating more than an hour this morning trying to answer a very simple question, which was, what was the total take back in 2019, and how close is 2024 to hitting that mark? And I found that I could look at projections going forward, and I found that I could find fourth quarter financial status reports going back to, I think, 2022 or 2021, and I could find adopted budgets, but I couldn't find actual numbers for 2019 and for the, and so it was very difficult to answer that question, much more difficult than it should have been. Even I used the budget tool that you outlined earlier, and that gave me projections going forward, but not looking backward. And I think for something like pandemic recovery, that's a key issue for someone like in my position. So I just put that out there that I understand that you have been very busy producing this budget and now answering questions about it. But if you can get your quarterly financial reports current online, I think there's only about 2 years of them, and I think the last one was maybe in 2022. That would be a help. Thank you.
President Priest-Stinson and Vice President Brandt, thank you for the comment. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I do know that when my colleague Ben was in front of you in May, we talked a lot about the revenue recovery. And we very nearly hit pre-pandemic levels in 2022, and so I think our hope is that we get there this year, but we can definitely get you a more refined comment on that.
Thank you. Please continue.
Okay. Local government aid, this is a large revenue source for the city, and it's an unrestricted one, so this flows into the general fund and supports the city's operations. You're seeing two bars here because the city shares our LGA with the park board as well as the municipal building commission. So the left-hand side represents the total amount, and then the right-hand side, the orange column, is Minneapolis's share of that. So we're increasing from $65.6 million in 2023 to $71.7 million in 2024, and that's a result of the state legislature taking action there. The legislature also approved public safety aid of $19 million one time. This is currently shown in the human resources budget page, and that's because it's likely to be used for retention and hiring initiatives in the public safety space. So we're going to be continuing to work on that with labor relations. Additional sales tax revenue was approved. There's a metro area sales tax that's likely to net about $6.2 million for the city in 2024. That's for a partial year. So we anticipate that will grow in future years, and that will all go to support affordable housing efforts in the city. Franchise fees are increasing to support the Climate Legacy Initiative, which is a $10 million initiative to address climate change at the local level. And for more on that, I would invite folks to listen in when the Health Department and Public Works do their presentations later on in the fall. And then finally, just want to note that we did add this grant section to the budget book. It has a lot of this information, as well as some state and federal funding opportunities that the city is considering and may apply for. All right, and planning for a settlement agreement. So the City Council did get a full presentation on the settlement agreement Monday afternoon. So I invite folks to look back at that if they're interested. We do have a signed agreement with the MDHR that the council agreed to resource, and so this budget does add funding for the police department, the attorney's office, civil rights, and IT. That amount between all of them totals $7.6 million in 2024. The city's also using an accounting mechanism. So we've identified $8 million in 2024. That's an obligated fund balance. You might hear us refer to it as the reserve. And the idea here is to take care of expenditures that are required by the settlement agreement, but are only going to be relevant for the duration of the settlement agreement, or to address sort of one-time emergent needs. An example of an expense that might be covered here is the independent evaluator that we're required to pay for. That's something that the city will not need after the conclusion of the settlement agreement. So we prefer to avoid putting it on the property tax levy, but we do still need to resource it. So this is the mechanism for that. And I'm nearly done. So the transparency portal. My other hat is the analyst for the public safety section of the portfolio. So
Just one other moment, Vice President Brandt.
Just said, I just want to be sure. You obviously are expecting greater costs from the Department of Justice consent decree. You've budgeted for those as best you can at this point. You don't know until it's fully negotiated whether that'll be sufficient. And so you've essentially got a contingency set aside for that. For that and other purposes. Okay.
So President Pristenson, Vice President Brandt, so we're in the unique position of having the MDHR settlement agreement defined, and we are still waiting for the DOJ consent decree. So you're right, we do have a cushion built into that reserve amount so that we can, if we were to get the DOJ specifics in the middle of next year, we would have some resources available to address those. The MDHR agreement certainly has some tight timelines, so I would anticipate DOJ would as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Please continue, thank you.
So relatedly, just wanted to highlight the transparency portal once more. So this is where all the reports that drive the budget book are hosted on our city's financial transparency site, which you can get to from the city website, or you can just Google Minneapolis transparency and you'll get there. So I often field questions about MPD overtime, so that's just the example that I put on this slide. So if one wanted to investigate a question like that, you could open up our transparency portal. It's a little daunting, the number of reports that are on there, so I just searched for the 2024 Mayor's Recommended Financials by Department report, and then from there you can scroll down and further refine the filters to get at the specifics of what you're looking at. So it's a useful tool, and it's one that you can easily share with your friends and neighbors. So you can just copy and paste the URL and send it in an email. There's also a share button on the screen that lets you download all that information as well. Okay, and markup. This is really more relevant for the city council portion of the budget, but the budget team works as an information hub throughout the year, so we continue to do that during the council phase. We've shared our budget proposal form that departments had to submit to council members. So that will guide the development of their amendments, and we will all work together to answer any financial questions or questions about impact of any amendments throughout the process. And Budget Chair Koski has shared all of the detailed markup information with the council. I think I'll simply say that we're looking forward to public hearings starting on October 25th. And I will conclude there.
Right, thank you for that presentation. Colleagues, are there any questions for staff on this presentation? Vice President Brandt.
Thank you for the presentation. I compared the property tax increases for all funds that were in the adopted 23 budget with what's recommended for 2024, and the mayor's recommendation held the line for 2024, but when we get in the out years, there's an increased, the increases are higher than they were in the budget that was adopted, the five-year financial direction portion of the budget that was adopted last December. For example, 25 goes from 5.8 to 6.2, 26 goes from 5.2 to 5.8, and that's fairly consistent, although the increases are smaller in the out years. Can you talk a little bit about macro factors driving that? I mean, we certainly see the pressure on this year's budget. We're accommodating presumably some portion of the public housing levy, and that's a good thing. We are absorbing a lot of consent decree costs, and we have obviously the cost of keeping the departments running here at the city. But which of those factors are coming into play in the out years?
President Priest-Stenson, Vice President Brandt, good eye. We did increase out-year expectations. As a finance department, we need to present a five-year financial direction that keeps our fund balance above our minimum policy. So we have a 17% minimum to hold in reserves. And so as we're considering throughout the summer which investments we're going to add to the budget, that's something that we pay attention to as well. I believe the far out years that were adopted, that were considered in the last adopted budget, were something like a 3.8% levy. I think knowing that that wasn't totally realistic for Minneapolis was one reason we were willing to move off of that. But every ongoing investment that the city makes, so new staff that we add, of which a lot are related to the settlement agreement, that all just draws down the available cash balance.
And if I could piggyback on that, President Priest-Stenson, I wanted to ask, I had a question. I'm having a Mitch McConnell moment. I'll come back to that.
All right. So, seeing that there is no further discussion, I'll direct the clerk to receive and file this presentation. Item 10 on the agenda is receiving a presentation of the Minneapolis Public Housing from the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, and I'll welcome Executive Director Abdi Warsami. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us. I skipped past. I'm supposed to be on item 9 with MPRB. My apologies, Director Warsami. My apologies. Looks like I got a case of the humans. All right, so let's backtrack that. Item number 9 on our agenda. We are receiving a presentation from the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board budget and levy, and I welcome our partners from the Parks Board.
Yeah, thank you, President Priest-Stenson and Vice President Brandt and board members. It's a privilege to be standing here today again and presenting our 2024 maximum tax levy request and general fund 2024 to 2028 financial projections. I will piggyback on the mayor's praise of his staff because I'd like to also acknowledge the incredible hard work that we've done to get to this point. It begins earlier than most people think. We spent a lot of months working together. I am grateful for the talented staff that we have every day that does the very hard work of working through a lot of the challenges that we face in the park system and the things that we need. And I would be forever, and I would, of course, invite up Director Weissman here shortly, and Paul Rosen and all the staff that worked hard, and to also acknowledge a really wonderful board that has been incredibly supportive and very engaged, and I just want to make sure I acknowledge that. I also would like to acknowledge, before I turn this over to Director Weissman, the really good work that we work with the mayor and the city. I had the privilege of sitting just 2 rows back here when the mayor gave his budget report to everyone in the city. And it was really very amazing to hear not only the support, but the integration of the park system and what it means to the city and its health and its wellness and what it means to the residents and the constituents. And so very grateful for the work that we've developed over the years since I've been here 19, and really being intentional in how we are working together as bodies of government to work together as a city and the park board to meet the needs of our community. So I also want to acknowledge again to the mayor and to the city of the work together, and thank you for that. With that, I'd like to introduce Director Weissman that will then walk through our presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Welcome, Director Weissman.
Thank you. President Priest Stinson, Vice President Brandt, and board members. I'm going to present our maximum tax levy request. Before I get started into the slides, I would like to tell the public that all of our budget information is on our public website at www.minneapolisparks.org/budget. So as a semi-autonomous body in the city of Minneapolis, we have a slightly different budget calendar and budget process that our board and our superintendent has put in place. So the presentation for you today is regarding our maximum property tax levy request, and we'll also go over our financial projections. The superintendent will present his recommended budget to the Minneapolis Park Board on October 18th. So we will not be going through actual budget book information this evening. So our board on September 6th passed Resolution 2023-161 requesting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation to issue, to set the maximum property tax levy for the Park Board at $82.6 million. It's a 5.35% increase. And at a glance, the first item is that you may recall from last year, we increased our property tax request due to local government aid reductions that we experienced in 2023. And we said at that time, if we received increases in local government aid, we would take that reduction of the amount that we increased in 2023. So that's the first line item. And then we have a very large provision for wage, fee, and inflationary increases. So just as the interim director for the city has talked about, there are pressures with wage and contract negotiations. We also are experiencing some fee increases, and then, like every other organization, inflationary increases. We also have the youth investment that is being phased in through property taxes, and it will reach $2.6 million in the year 2027. And then in this property tax levy request, we do have a request for one additional FTE for our care for park assets, and that would be a professional level position that will help us implement our capital and rehab programs at the park board. So our request to the Board of Estimate and Taxation is in line with the recommendation from the mayor. So the 5.3% is the same that I showed on the other slide. The next slide, I'm going to reflect our financial projections for 2024 through 2028. Our projections for property taxes will be different in the out years than how the city and the mayor reflect our property tax levy increases. And I'll talk about those differences when I get to those slides. So our general fund 2024 to 2028 projections for property taxes make up 78% of our general fund budget. So if you think about all the services that we provide for free and the open access to our parks. We are more heavily reliant on property taxes for our general fund operations. And then local government aid is 9%. You'll see the full-time wages and fringe increase, part-time wages and fringe increase as we keep pace with the minimum wage requirements, as well again as the contract settlements. We have a built-in increase for other expenditures. Again, that is inflation. For our out years, we are showing property tax increases between 5.35% for next year, and then going down slightly until 2028. And then I want to point out, you'll see that there is a deficit in 2025 and 2026. That is due to the ARPA funding. So the Park Board was allocated ARPA dollars for our youth investment, and that is phasing out as property taxes are increasing. But as you heard from the interim director for the city, that is due to expire on December 31st, 2024, and our $260,000 allocation goes through 2027. So we will have an estimated gap for both of those years that we will be working with our board as well as with the city to hopefully solve for those problems, because our youth investment is staffing. So we have those staff on board, and we will want to make sure that there's no gap in the funding of those positions. So why is our out years slightly higher than what the city is, or what the mayor projected in their financial projections? We include system equity investment, and we have started to build that into our 5-year projections so that we maintain current service levels for system and expansion or increased usership. So the 3 big ones that are coming online between 2025 and 2028 are Graco Park, Upper Harbor Terminal, and then North Commons Park, and there'll be cost implications for activating those sites. And at North Commons Park, there's an expansion of services that will be provided there, depending on which design is ultimately approved for construction. These are estimates, and when we get into our current year, we refine those estimates. So our 20-year neighborhood park plan, this is funded through the net debt bonds or other city funding sources. So we have concurrent ordinances that govern this funding source, and it allows the city flexibility in how they fund this on an annual basis. So you will note in 2024 that or it's not on this slide, I apologize, it's in the bonding for parkways. So the board and city, so you'll see that we have a guaranteed minimum amount through 2026. The board and city will need to begin negotiations in 2025 to set the guaranteed minimum annual amount for years 27 through 31. And we need to do this according to the ordinance by December 15th of 2025. And so at this point, after 2026, that amount remains flat until we have those negotiations and decisions. So before we talk about parkways, I would like to, the park board president would like to say a couple of words.
Welcome, President Forney.
Thank you, President Priest-Stinson and Vice President Brandt, as well as board members. I actually just can't believe that I'm here, and the reason why I say that is to present our Parkway plan. We started working on this last year, and I swear I did not think that we would be able to be presenting to you a budget with this item in it. I'm so grateful to the mayor that he sees the critical need for this. I'm grateful, of course, to my colleagues and everything, and particularly Commissioner Benet. This is a real critical need, but that's what this board is about. They understand these critical needs. As Superintendent Bangora states it, this is a legacy moment for us. And I also want to comment, even though it's not something that you'll be voting on, but also our stormwater is something that is also just basic and critical, and the fact that that's coming to fruition, I'm just so grateful. Thank you all for your service.
Thank you. Please continue.
Thanks, President Priest-Stinson and Vice President Brandt. So on the Parkway paving, you will see an escalation in the amount to be allocated to Parkway paving, and it progressively increases until it reaches almost $2.8 million. What I wanted to point out is that the city, these dollars are funded through the city of Minneapolis, and they have flexibility in how they fund each annual CIP, whether they use bonding or they use general fund dollars. And in this chart, it shows in 2024 that there's a transfer from the city general fund to fund our program in 2024. So the informational item is, again, on our stormwater. We have worked closely with the mayor's office and city staff and our board, and we are going to be provided part of the utility fee. We are included in the utility fee schedule. This schedule is not quite online yet. It's in the pending edit phase, but it shows the park board being reflected in 2023 at 26 cents. That pays for about $800,000 in monitoring and education that the stormwater fee has been paying annually to us. In 2024, you will see an increase to 42 cents, and that is due to this negotiation between the park board and the city. It provides an additional $500,000 to the park board to begin stormwater management, and we are working with the city to co-lead a mapping of our infrastructure so that we know what is owned by us and what is owned by the city, what will be managed by us, what is managed by the city. So we are looking forward to doing that process. So the next steps for the parkway paving as well as the stormwater utility fee is that we are working on concurrent ordinances that will govern these two programs. And it'll be similar to the NPP 20 concurrent ordinances, for those of you that are familiar with that. And those are, again, in the drafting and editing phase. And we hope to have both concurrent ordinances passed by both the park board and the city council by the end of this year. And we're here for questions.
Vice President Brandt.
Thank you for your presentation. I know that the 2 million that you will eventually get to for parkways was not what you had hoped for, but I understand that the mayor had the difficulty of trying to fit major new requests from MPHA and the park board into a budget at the same percentage as was in last year's 5-year financial direction, on top of dealing with the consent decree. I happened to be out at Bede-Makaska yesterday and ran into the chairs of the two legislative transportation commissioners, Senator Dibble and Representative Hornstein, and kidded them about being out on an infrastructure inspection tour. But afterwards, I wondered if, as a way of augmenting what the mayor is proposing to spend over the next few years, has the park board ever considered a request to the state for matching bonding funds for parkways? Ordinarily, that would be a local responsibility, but I have seen so many pieces in the state bonding package reflect very local responsibilities that I wondered if you'd ever tried that.
I'll try and help you answer that. We did meet with Commissioner Benny, and I met with Senator Dibble and Representative Hornstein, and to quote Scott, he said, "We're orphans." And he really, truly was trying so hard to put in his transportation bill that everybody would be benefiting. So I'm sure it is something that he will be looking at, next year in the legislature, in the session. So just for you to know, we already are going to be working cooperatively with the city if any opportunity is possible. But at this point, there is nothing definite other than we know we're an orphan.
Thank you. If I could continue with a few additional questions?
Yes, followed by, Mayor Frey, was your comment related to that before Vice President Brandt continues?
Madam Chair, just briefly,
Yes.
And thank you, Mr. Brandt. That, by the way, is an item that the city, and well, specifically, I, as mayor, would strongly support in advocating to the state to get some of those assistance. Just wanted to be on record saying that.
Thank you, Mayor Frey. Vice President Brandt, please continue.
I didn't quite, Ms. Wiseman, I didn't quite follow the line in the property tax levy request at a glance that has the subtraction of $449,000. I assumed that was because the local government aid package didn't pass the 22 session as anticipated. Are you saying that the city held you harmless? No.
Yeah, Vice President Pristenson and President Pristenson, Vice President Brandt. That is correct. In 2023, we had a line item in our property tax as a glance where we raised property taxes to cover the shortfall that was created by that legislative session. Otherwise, there would have been service level reductions that we would have needed to be made. And when we made that presentation to our board and to the BET last year, we said that if local government aid was increased in the next legislative session, that we would back that amount out. So this is reflecting the backing of that amount out of our property taxes.
Thank you for refreshing my memory on that. The line on youth investment continues the increases that I think started, was it last year or the year before? Are you, putting ARPA aside, are you on track to finance the sort of long-range vision that the superintendent outlined in his presentation a year or two ago?
President Pristenson and Vice President Brandt, yes, we have 22 new positions that are out in our system providing free, direct programming and access to our youth in the city of Minneapolis. And the gap that I reflected, there's several ways that we could potentially close those gaps once ARPA leaves. If the park board has general fund balance in excess of our financial requirements, we could put one-time dollars to fill that gap. If we're unable to do so, potentially we might come back to this body and ask for, instead of getting to the 2.6 million in 2027, we might ask this body to get us to the 2.6 million in 2025. But we're hoping and strongly working towards hopefully solving part of that problem or some of that problem in other ways.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask about the 6-year property tax direction that you outlined.
Yes.
This sort of reflects the known knowns, but over the years I've seen the Park Board bring forward a series of sort of special levy requests. The ash levy, for example, that lasted for I think about 8 years, the use investment levy, and now the Parkway request, all of which are, I think, valid asks. But I'm wondering if over this time frame you see any things like that that are likely to produce a levy increase other than perhaps offsetting ARPA for the youth youth investment.
President Priestinson and Vice President Brandt, how I'll answer that question is the tree levy was for a specific issue. We had emerald ash borer that entered our city, and we are in charge of all of the public trees in the entire city of Minneapolis. And so we had to deal with the removal and replanting of new trees for the public trees in our system. So that was kind of a separate, kind of special project type where it had a start and a stop. The youth investment and the Parkway requests, we hope are ongoing. We plan to have those be ongoing. And again, we are looking at other sources for Parkway, but just to kind of add to what President Forney was talking about, through Metropolitan Council, we do not receive Parkway money as like the Three Rivers Park District would. Because if you understand, the Three Rivers Park District, those roadways into their parks are just park activities, right? Just park, there's not a drive-through. Our parkways are really thoroughfares throughout our entire city. And so we have to look for other options for funding that parkway improvement.
Thank you. That was very educational. Also wanted to ask about well, I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you for your answers. I appreciate your time. I'm sorry, that one thing. Going from 26 cents to 42 cents on the stormwater fee, again, not what you were hoping for, but it's an increase. That'll allow you to do mapping of what's yours and what's the city's and who's going to maintain what. Do you anticipate then when that is completed, and you have obviously an expert on your board in that area, coming back and asking for additional funding for that particular item as you have a better handle on your needs?
President Priestinson and Vice President Brandt, that is correct. Once we understand the inventory of our assets and the condition of our assets, we will have a better handle on what type of a capital program and stormwater management that we will need.
Thank you.
Commissioner Benny?
Thank you, President Priestinson, and thank you, Director Wiseman and Park Board's team for the presentation. I wanted to just clarify something to my colleagues about the Parkway items in the presentation. The other important part of this is that, as Director Wiseman mentioned, we're working on concurrent ordinances with the city, and the ordinance will sort of capture the idea that we'll be seeking not a dollar amount as much as a level of service, kind of a pavement condition amount, or pavement condition level. And so the other thing to know is that the city is actually already in the process of reviewing the data that they've been collecting over the years on the condition of the parkways, and has, I think, procured a consultant to actually do that evaluation. So I think there's some, in the future, there's some opportunity to understand what the upkeep and keep up dollar amount is for the parkways. And it could be less, it could be more. So I think I just want to make that point. And then the other thing I really wanted to highlight to my colleagues is what the Park Board calls system equity investments. And I think that's a really interesting concept, because we're an organization in the city that's actually growing our portfolio, and we're growing our portfolio based on the growth of the city and demand for that infrastructure. It's built in with parkland dedication work. So as we add more residents, we're adding more park capacity and we're adding more improvements. And so we can look out and say, oh, in 3 years, we're going to need more staff to mow more grass or do more programming in these locations coming online. And I think that's a really very strategic, really important thing that the Park Board is doing, because we need to grow that park system to support our increased population. And so working with the city on that is critical, and understanding that I think is really important. So that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
I just want to make a statement quick before I call on you, Vice President Brandt, that I just want to say how much I appreciate the dedication of funding to our youth, which also means to our families. It can't be said enough that youth are the greatest investment that we have. They're going to be caring for us. And I think we know that there is no shortage of issues that we're having with our youth within community. And so we need to be making those investments and making that commitment to our futures. It's their future, and it's also our collective future. So I just want to say how much I appreciate the work that you all have put into that and the advocacy, and just know that you definitely have a champion in me. I just really, really appreciate that dedication and focus. It's critical. Vice President Brandt.
In response to what Commissioner Abeni mentioned, I just want to urge the park system to not slap lipstick on a pig when it comes to parkway repairs. I realize with $2 million, it's very difficult to do anything more than a mill and overlay, but a mill and overlay doesn't really cure the deep systemic issues that you have in your peaty soils around the lakes, and as any cyclist will tell you. The PCI is a measure of surface, essentially rideability, and urge you to do deep investigations, which, even if you can't address them initially with the financing you have, might bolster your case for state help.
Commissioner Abeni.
And I'm sorry, I can't help but to comment on that. That's an excellent point, Vice President Brandt. And I think that that's actually also something that's in the concurrent ordinance, that the two organizations, the city and the Park Board, are going to work together on actually a long-range capital plan for reconstructing the parkways, because the average age of the parkways is about as old as I am, and isn't going to hold up forever. So we need a strategy there. And I absolutely agree. I think that's possibly a really good opportunity to go to the state or something like that. So, but I appreciate your thinking very much.
Any further comment? All right. Seeing none, thank you for that presentation. Thank you again for your work. I ask the clerk to receive and file this presentation, and now, item 10 on the agenda is receiving the presentation from Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, and I welcome Executive Director Abdi Warsami and his team, for real this time. Welcome, thank you for being here.
Thank you, President Priestinson, Vice President Brandt, members of the BET. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate the fact that you kept the best presentation for last, so thank you. With me today are my colleagues from the Housing Authority, Laura Dykema, our Planning and Development Director, and Tim DeRose, our CFO. And we'll be presenting the $5 million annual levy budget and 5-year plan of the Housing Authority. And I want to thank, first of all, the mayor and his team for the work that they've done and the back end work. It wasn't easy to get to where we are today, but we are very supportive of the $5 million. I think it's the largest investment that the city of Minneapolis has made historically with regards to Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. And I've said this many times before, we would like to be treated like our wonderful park board and recreation. We are a key city infrastructure, and we house 5% of the city's population. And I'll start off by saying you're all aware of the challenges that we're facing and the historic disinvestment from the federal government with regards to our public housing across the country. And we face extensive capital needs. We estimate there's $229 million needs just for the agency to keep what we have. That's the reason that we've been asking and advocating for the reinstatement of the housing levy. The agency has developed a 1-year budget and a 5-year capital plan to maximize the $5 million year housing levy. These plans were developed through the lens of the agency's strategic plan and prepared with the careful consideration and feedback of MPHA's greatest champions, which is our residents. And I would like to thank our residents for showing up today and for championing this. And without them, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you to all the Minneapolis Public Housing residents for coming here. The fact that you're the only ones who showed up is also testament to the work that you've done and you continue to do. So thank you very much. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to Laura Dykema to kind of go over our plan. So go ahead, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Warsami, and thank you, President Priestinson and Vice President Brandt and all board members here today for giving us this opportunity. So I'm going to be going over the details, the annual details of our budget proposal, our proposed uses of the $5 million annually. So I will start with 2024. Our first project is a high-rise preservation and new unit production project. This would be a comprehensive rehab of a 1960s era high-rise that houses over 100 public housing residents. The scope of work anticipated would be, of course, to address the capital backlog and future capital needs of the property. So updating all of the systems, all of the building envelope, kitchen and bath rehab, but also to address property enhancements. You've heard today from some of our residents that we need upgraded ventilation and cooling systems and other community needs and amenities that these properties do not currently have. We also anticipate being able to produce 25 to 30 new units at this site, and it would leverage other tools and financing tools, including HUD conversion tools, the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, which would allow us to bring project-based vouchers into the property, 4% bonds and low-income housing tax credits, and debt and equity. And this is financing that would also position the property for long-term sustainability. For those of you that are familiar with our Elliott Twins project, our first RAD conversion and property that was financed with LIHTC, this would be very similar to that. And I think Mary McGovern, who has now joined us, could be a testimony to what we were able to do at that property with these tools. We're projecting a total development cost of 40 to 50 million, and this would close in 2025. Our budget does include funding for this both in 2024 and 2025. The next two projects I'll discuss are scattered site infill demonstration projects. So our first one is replacing a long-term vacant high-needs 1920s home in South Minneapolis. This would be replaced with a 3-unit development. There'd be at least one larger bedroom unit as well as at least one accessible unit. We lack accessible units in our family housing stock, so this would give us an opportunity to add at least one accessible unit. And the second one would be replacing a home that was recently lost to a fire or severely damaged with a fire with a duplex, replacing a single family. So overall, preserving 2 units, but adding 3 additional units. And we consider these demonstration projects because we would utilize HUD's Faircloth to RAD program at these sites. And for some of you on the board, I know you're familiar with what Faircloth means, but I'll quickly try to explain this for those of you who are not familiar. So many years ago, HUD put together a kind of a complex formula that produced the maximum number of units that a housing authority could operate and receive subsidy for. Changes in our housing stock over the years have now allowed us to, or does we have a current Faircloth authority of nearly 1,000 units. So that's the number of units, public housing units, that we could potentially create. I'm not sure exactly why it's called Faircloth. You'd have to ask HUD about that. But we do have that opportunity. And HUD recognizing that the public housing platform has complications, it doesn't provide long-term capital funding to make sure that the units are maintained over time, which is also why they've created the RAD program that allows you to switch from the public housing platform, the public housing subsidy, to the more stable Section 8. They have come up with a program called Faircloth to RAD. So the housing authority builds the home as a public housing unit. It's a public housing unit for a day, but then we immediately convert the subsidy to Section 8. And so while this program has been around for a few years, it's proven challenging and complex, and not a lot of housing authorities have been able to utilize it or been successful with it. HUD recently has come out with some different rules around this that is making it a little bit less complex to use. So we want to try this at these 2 sites as a pilot to see how we can put this Faircloth authority to work, both with our own developments, but potentially partnering with other developers in the community to produce more housing units across Minneapolis. So we have $750,000 in the budget for the 3-unit property and $500,000 for the duplex property. You also heard today about capital investments that are needed in our high-rises, particularly elevators were discussed here today. So we have $1.25 million in our budget for 2024 for comprehensive elevator modernization. And this would be replacing all of the machines and controls and traveling cables, but also bringing up the cabs to current accessibility requirements as well as code requirements. In 2025, this again would be the second year of funding for our high-rise preservation and production project, as well as capital dollars, $2.5 million to address, again, you heard today, the need to address ventilation and cooling within our high-rises. All of our high-rises were built without central air conditioning. We have since, in the 1980s, added cooling to our first floor particularly in our community rooms, so residents do have a place to go to on those hot summer days. But HUD still views air conditioning as a luxury item. And so we do have to charge residents for window air conditioners anytime they have them. And so we want to look at a different approach to how we can address cooling in our high rises, working around some of those complications. So this would provide funding for that. We currently actually have a study underway to look at the options that we have as well as the cost of those options. In 2026, we would be looking at another scattered site infill project. This is very similar to our family housing expansion project that we have currently underway, where we're densifying sites across the city and replacing single-family homes and duplexes with multi-unit buildings. And so this would be a 5-site, 30-unit scattered site redevelopment project in non-ACP 50 areas. It redevelops 7 current units and replaces them with a total of 30 units. This again would be leveraged with project-based vouchers, and we are anticipating a 9% bonds and LIHTC and debt to also help finance this. We could also, in this instance, utilize the Fair Cloth to Rad program if we are able to successfully pilot that in 2024. We also have another high-rise preservation project that would be very similar to the one that I discussed earlier. This one may not necessarily include additional units, although we always do look for ways that we can add units with any of these types of projects. And so it would be very similar to the types of improvements, addressing capital needs, but also addressing those property enhancements and amenities that are specific to the population living at that building. This project would again be funded over 2 years in 26 and 27 for a total of $4.5 million, and it would leverage those same tools that I discussed earlier, HUD's RAD program, as well as 4% bonds and LIHTC. We also have some elevator modernization, again funded in 2026, as well as high-rise window replacement. A lot of our windows are older and not energy efficient, they're drafty. So this would be replacing those windows with low E glass. They'd be more energy efficient and meet current code, which includes fall protection safety features. In 2027, again, this would be the second year of funding for a high-rise preservation, as well as some funding for our property at the Glendale Townhomes. I think a lot of you are familiar with this property. It's one that we've been discussing for many years. This is our single most, the greatest opportunity that MPHA has to both preserve and add units in an area of opportunity in our city. So this would preserve 184 units and potentially add more. The funds that we've set aside, both in 27 and 28 for this project, are for very early engagement activities. We know this project has a long runway. We want to hear, before we form any sort of vision around this, what our residents want to see at this property. It would also include engaging the surrounding neighborhood. We do anticipate starting some of that early engagement in 2024 so that we would be ready for more robust planning by 2027, with anticipated starting on a project potentially in 2029. We also, again, have some capital investments in 2027, the high-rise ventilation and cooling that I already mentioned, as well as elevator modernization and some more window replacement projects. And finally, in 2028, we would be doing a second scattered site infill project, very similar scale to what I mentioned for the 2026 budget. So this again would be a 5-site, 30-unit infill project, again in non-ACP 50 areas. It would redevelop 8 existing units and replace those 8 with a total of 30. Again, we would anticipate using 9% bonds and LIHTC. Again, here's another property, or another project, I should say, that we could potentially utilize Fair Cloth to Rad. Again, additional funding for Glendale pre-development activities, as well as additional projects to address those capital investments, same capital investments that I've mentioned before, the high-rise ventilation and cooling, elevator modernization, and window replacement. And I will turn it back over to Executive Director Warsame.
Thank you very much, Laura. The agency is seeking the Minneapolis Board of Estimate and Taxation's approval of the mayor's recommended $5 million housing tax levy for 2024, in line with Mayor Fry's proposal, subject to approval by the Minneapolis City Council. A $5 million housing levy would cost the median Minneapolis homeowner around $21 a year. Over a 5-year period, a fully funded levy would deliver MPHA at least $25 million in new direct funding. So everything Laura talked about is on top of what we do every year with the capital funding that we get from HUD. This new funding would enable the agency to address current and upcoming capital needs, create leverage opportunities for additional public and private resources, pave the way for long-term preservation of at least 500 units, and also support the potential creation of 100 new, deeply affordable homes. And that means, life-changing opportunity for many families on our waiting list. Secondary objectives MPHA would also like to accomplish with the proposed levy is to create new accessible units for our folks with disabilities, install energy-efficient green energy technologies, create new housing for homeless and unsheltered members of our community. Millions of dollars in contracted work would flow to minority and women-owned businesses and Section 3 low-income vendors. But most importantly, thousands of current and future MPHA residents stand to benefit from the proposed activities funded by a housing levy in 2024 and beyond. So we stand for questions, if there's any.
I just want to thank everyone for being able to get on board and get on the same page. I don't think it's a secret that I've been a huge advocate for this levy and finally making it happen, and I am quite pleased and thankful to all of my colleagues that have worked on this. And I would also be, it was just a few short weeks ago that I was honored with a bunch of other Black women for our Black Girl Magic. So I would be remiss if I did not name my other colleagues that have been pushing behind this, which is Representative Abaje, as well as Councilmember Wansley for being part of the big push. Thank you to the mayor for coming to this decision of funding the levy specifically and not putting it in the budget. And I think it just shows what we can do when we all work collaboratively and we listen to the residents, our elders. They might not be our mothers or grandparents or fathers, but they are someone's. And I can't name enough how critically important it is to make sure that we are making these investments and doing our part. I've never suggested, nor would I now, that the levy is the ultimate solution, but it is definitely part of the solution, and I'm quite proud of the collective work of the residents, of the council, my colleagues here, and other members of the community that understand why this is important. I've mentioned before that I was raised in public housing in California. My father still lives in public housing in California, and so there is a direct reason why I'm that much more passionate about this issue, because I know what it's like when you're living in substandard conditions, and it's unacceptable. So I'm quite pleased today, and it warms my heart, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation about future investments. I want to thank you all for your work and your dedication. Do any of my colleagues have any comments? Vice President Brandt.
I just want to take a moment to mark this as a historic day. I mean, that the mayor has come forward and reactivated the public housing levy. I know it's not everything that is needed, but when you're trying to fit a budget into certain parameters, I think it's a reasonable first start. And there are future budgets, and you'll have another bite at the apple. I don't think anybody who's been in public housing, as I have over the last 20 years, can dispute the need for modernization. I do have a question about the amount of the levy. It's $5 million. And I wanted to ask, because the city had funding preceding that $5 million that the mayor alluded to a few meetings ago, how much of the $5 million in the levy is an increase over the base that MPHA was already getting from the general fund? All five. Thank you, Mayor Fry. And I also want to commend President Priest Stinson for her leadership on this issue. She certainly has been a persuasive voice. Director Warsame, do you anticipate that you will be seeking the full amount that has been outlined by your board in future budget years, the $12 million?
I mean, I want to answer the question you posed before, which is this is $4 million on top of the 1 million ongoing that we would get, that we used to get, and we only got that 1 million ongoing a couple of years ago with the help of the mayor. So it is unprecedented, the amount of money we received. And I will leave it to our staff to see what kind of requests we'll make in the future. So I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but I want to say that I'm very supportive. We are very supportive, and we're very appreciative of this because it is a transformative moment, and this is ongoing money as well, and it is on the levy. So, it's like you said, it's a historic moment, and one thing that I want to mention is that MPHA brings a lot of federal dollars into the city of Minneapolis through the programs that we serve, and we serve around 26,000 people, on any given night. Have a roof over their heads because of the work that we do. So while this is a large amount in comparison from what we got from the city, it's only around 3% of our total budget. But it is transformative, and we're very appreciative, and we thank the mayor, the council president, Councilmember Koski. I think, are you the chair of the park board? Board member Abeni, so thank you very much. So we're really appreciative of all the work, because I think, it's like the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. It took everybody here to get to where we are, and we really, really are appreciative. So thank you very much.
Mayor Fry, did you have some additions? Thank you.
I can comment briefly. This investment is historic. When we first started the year, we made a commitment to dramatically increase funding on an ongoing basis for public housing. That wasn't something that was ever in dispute, to be clear. We were making the movements from the very beginning. We just can't, it would be irresponsible to commit to a specific dollar figure before you know the other items within the budget itself. Public housing, and deeply affordable housing is something that's at the core of my belief system. I believe that it is a foundational element from which people can rise, and public housing specifically within the stock of affordable has been neglected for, at this point, generations. Since I was born, the federal government, presidents, both Democrat and Republican, have defunded or underfunded public housing drastically, leaving cities to pick up the check. And to this point, largely we haven't. I heard some people say we need to restore the maximum levy. To be clear, we never had the maximum levy. This is the most, by far, that we've ever funded public housing. Many times more, as far as I'm aware, than we've done before. It's worth it. Our residents will benefit. The thousands of residents that we have in public housing need it. And by the way, I can't remember the exact figure, 7,000 or so people that are on the waiting list will also benefit. And so I want to thank the MPHA team for really working with us on this one, Director Warsame and Laura Dykema, and the whole team over there. I want to thank my budget team as well, both internally in my office, Andrea Inouye, who is, I believe, watching right now, Peter Ebnit, and our whole team in finance that have done such an amazing job. And I also want to emphasize, one, they need more funding. This is not like the end of the road, and I'm calling on others to step up. The state needs to fund this more. The amount of money that they put in, well, of course, we're all thankful for it. It's not ongoing, and it's not a large sum. The federal government needs to step up also. Again, it's been underfunded and neglected for generations. It causes all sorts of deferred maintenance. And that deferred maintenance doesn't go away, it compounds. And so if we want to keep people in habitable conditions, one, and if we want to increase the stock and the number of units that can give people homes, it costs money. A lot of people says, well, it's not something you can just throw more money at. Well, actually, this is something that benefits from money. And it can't just be the city that's stepping up. We will step up. We are doing our part, and this is exemplary of that, but we need to go further. I'll also note that a lot of the really good work that was highlighted through this, fair cloth work, which we need to do more of, the scattered site work, would not be possible without the 2040 plan. So we have a 2040 plan that we've moved forward with to allow conversion from single family to duplex or to triplex, and in some other corridors allowed that stock to go from 1 or 2 units to 8 units. That increases the number of units that we have for Minneapolis public housing. While most, if not all, of the big wins are already in the system, I hope, so they're grandfathered in, we just recently had a court decision that is disastrous, hugely problematic, and really nonsensical, that would prevent us from adding public housing units specifically in non-ACP 50 areas. And so if we care about not concentrating all people of lower incomes in one area of the city, then we have to be able to have affordable housing and public housing in non-already low-income areas. This is a big deal. We need a solution to it. To be clear on the 2040 plan, we are appealing, we're fighting this one hard. And we're not gonna give in, we're not quitting, because this matters to a whole lot of people and pushes back on 100 years worth of intentional segregation in the city. I'll add that we also do need some help stepping up to, I mean, if this remains in place the way it is, and it shouldn't, but we need help then to change the law. And so this is going to require collective effort here, and we all need to be focusing on the goal, noting that this will not be possible without the changes that were made. It would not be possible, wouldn't be allowed. So again, I want to thank everybody for it. I want to thank the Minneapolis Public Housing residents for their work, for their advocacy, and for their commitment to this city. We love you, we care about you, and we want to make sure we're putting our money where our mouth is. Thank you.
Council President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Priest-Stinson. If we were in church, I would say amen to your comments, Mayor Fry. And I do want to just publicly thank Mayor Fry and President Morsami for coming up with this historic negotiation compromise, which is a dirty word in American politics and seemingly a dirty word in Minneapolis politics as well, but that's how we move things forward. And so I want to offer my thanks to the both of you, but to all of the entities that have stepped forward to push for this change. And I'll just state, you know, I worked feverishly with President Morsami when he was a city council member to improve conditions at MPHA, and we were able to move through the RAD program, which resulted in the 2 beautifully rehabilitated Elliott twins, as they are known as, and even added new units of housing. I do want to speak to the issue that the mayor brought up around the 2040 plan. This is the court ruling is one of the most egregious rulings that I have witnessed in, okay, maybe not in that long a time, because our Supreme Court has been pretty egregious as well. However, you know, I think the challenge that we have in our society and certainly in this city is a lot of people want to focus on equality. And we can't have equality until we bring up the most marginalized people in our community, which is why we need equity. Equity helps the most marginalized people. And then when we come up to a place where everybody is equal, then we can have equality-minded policy solutions where everybody will benefit at the same time. But if we only focus on equality, guess what? The people who live in public housing will continue to struggle and live in public housing. The people who are low income in our communities will continue to be low income, and we will never achieve the equity that we all say we desire. The 2040 plan allows us to have more opportunities for more housing. That is what is going to solve our housing crisis, is more housing. It's not rent control, though that can be a part of the strategy. But ultimately, more housing has to be a part of that strategy as well. And so this historic investment today, this ongoing, and I know we heard from our residents in public housing, and I deeply appreciate their advocacy and commitment to coming forward, you know, and the appreciation that was mentioned about the $5 million, but that's $5 million ongoing. That it's not a one-time investment like the state has offered. It's ongoing. And I put myself in queue prior to the mayor to call on all of our other partners, governmental partners, to step up, particularly HUD. This is federal housing, but certainly the state needs to be involved. The county needs to be involved. Our philanthropic community needs to be involved in this work and these efforts. And so, you know, we at the city have made this commitment, and I hope and pray, and I will be working hard to make sure that we can increase these funding as we continue to move forward and realize opportunities to be able to do that. But we have to have support and investment from our other partners as well. So while we celebrate today, as many of our residents have testified today, we need more. And that's the work that we have to do moving forward. So those are my comments, and I commend you guys on the work that you are doing. Public housing is affordable housing, and we need to make sure that we preserve that into perpetuity. Thank you.
Vice President Brandt.
Thank you. Director Warsame, even though I support this levy, I have just some questions about the details to help me understand a little better. Not trying to move into the area of determining how you best spend your money, but before when you vote for a levy, you want to make sure you understand the implications. The high-rise preservation and new unit production, is that going to be occurring within the current building envelope, in other words, through unit conversions, or will you use a portion of the sites that you have to add housing there?
President Priest-Stinson, Vice President Brandt, we believe we have opportunities potentially to do both. But most likely, how we're able to to add a considerable amount of units, typically is outside of the existing building footprint. How we were able to accomplish this at the Elliott Twins was by building a community building that moved offices and all of the general community amenities into that. And then we were able to repurpose the first floors, which housed those services before, and add units within the existing tower. So it's going to be different from site to site. But I will say that the sites we are considering for this particular project, we would likely be looking at adjacent property.
And it sounds like your scattered site units are essentially intensifying the number of units on sites you already own and for various reasons are in need of replacement. And I wanted to ask you about the, for example, the 3-unit one has an $850,000 per unit total development cost, whereas the 2-unit is only $500,000. When you normally think that more units, the lower the cost. Can you address that?
President Priestens and Vice President Brandt, these are only preliminary estimates, but I will say that the site with the 3-unit may potentially have some more environmental issues to address. You know, we never, there's different conditions in the soils and things like that. But also we're just seeing higher construction pricing, and the demolition costs associated with the existing homes would be different too, just because of the makeup of those homes.
And I noticed that in addressing the high-rise preservation, that it appears as though you're saving the larger buildings, 125 to 150 residents for the out years, and starting with ones that are just a little bit over 100. Is that just trying to get your feet wet on a smaller scale project? And given this is scheduled to start next year, do you have, what buildings do you have in mind?
Yeah. President Priestens and Vice President Brandt, for next year, we are actually actively doing due diligence at 2 different sites right now to narrow down which option we believe is best to move forward. Both of those sites have over 100 units. One of them actually has closer to 200. So it's really about the opportunity that we best see in front of us. There's some varying factors there. And yes, we would be looking at a site. We haven't quite pinpointed what that site would be. There's a lot of factors that we have to consider before making a selection to advance a project. So that's kind of a generic number that we're holding right now, because a lot can change even from day to day, let alone 2 to 3 years from now.
Okay.
So there's no particular reason why we're, advancing one over the other, and those figures could certainly change.
I see you've allowed yourselves a long lead time for Glendale, which is probably very prudent considering the history of attempts to make that project go. It's a tough nut to crack because of some of the politics of the small p opposition that's arisen there. What are you going to do differently this time to try and get this one over the finish line compared to what you've tried in the past?
President Priestens, Vice President Brandt, I think we've already been doing a lot of that groundwork already by demonstrating that we keep our promises to our residents, like we did at Elliott Twins and like we did at family housing, or we are doing with family housing expansion. We're not privatizing, we're not displacing residents. If they do have to move off-site, they are welcome. They are offered the right to return. Their rent has stayed the same. So all of the fears that have come with RAD and using those tools, we've shown that those are not true and that we are keeping our promises. So what I will say is that that's the kind of groundwork that we've been working very hard on to show our residents and demonstrate that this is what we're going to deliver. And so I would say first and foremost, that's what we're doing differently. But also we will approach resident engagement much differently than last time. There's new players at the table. We have a very different approach to how we engage with our residents. We've done it significantly at the Elliott Twins as well as our family housing expansion project. And we are going to start really early. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to start, Abby's talked about going and have coffee and door knocking with those residents and doing some very early visioning with them. So that is how we will be approaching this differently.
Sounds prudent. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for that. I think this presentation is, oh, wait. Council President Jenkins.
Thank you. I won't belabor this very long, but I do just want to note, I do get a number of comments and concerns and complaints from public housing residents that they sometimes don't get the information in accessible languages. So to the extent that you can help people understand the issues and concerns that are going on as you communicate with residents, you know, I know there is a large East African community, and Director Warsami probably can communicate with those folks, but he probably can't talk to all of them every day. And so to the extent possible, can we try to help people get communication that they can understand and relate to?
President Priest-Henson, Board Member Jenkins, yes, we do have lots of translation. I actually have people on my team. Our relocation coordinator is bilingual, and he works a lot directly with all of our residents. But I will say, too, that some of the tools that we use are very complex and very difficult to explain to our residents, and so we do try our best to explain them in very simple terms. But it is something that's hard for us to do, but we always do provide translation services at all of our meetings. We make sure that we look at the building makeup and the population and the languages spoken, and we make sure that we have those translations services at all of our resident meetings.
Thank you, Vice President Jenkins, for speaking to, or excuse me, Council President Jenkins for speaking to the importance of language justice. It is not optional. It's just part of what we have to do, and with the difficulties, we have to figure that out, and I wouldn't be surprised whether it was from whatever money it comes from that there's increased allocation to make that happen. As most of you know, other languages take longer to translate. Spanish, for example, there's usually 20 more words involved, so the time to comprehend and to be able to interpret, it means that the meetings are slower, and that you might have to break down your meetings more. So I just want to speak on that. And I want to say that your presentation is representative of what we can do together that we can't do apart. Everybody spoke to that, but I just want to additionally name that it is going to take us all. We all know we have different politics and the way that we move about our communities and engage people, but we can't use that as an excuse to ice anyone out. So I just want to make this a call to action to my colleagues and other colleagues that aren't here, that we must work together. This is not about us. This isn't about votes. This isn't about political theater. This is about real people who are living in conditions that even with this is a very long-term plan and still is not enough. So I can't emphasize that enough, and just know that, again, I am a partner, and I expect to be called upon for anything that has to do with this in any way that I can help. And I'm sure my colleagues feel the same. With that, seeing no further discussion, I'll direct the clerk to receive and file this presentation, and we have completed all business to come before us, and without objection, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's been recent research that's showing that bee populations are declining. So we're doing this because there is habitat loss going on, there is different pesticides that are harming our bee population.